I would like to give you a concrete example so that you understand how this interplay between shareholders, investors, and companies is regulated in European company law. And I take one of the most recent directives, and it's the so-called takeover directive. It is on a concept which is typically referred to as the market for corporate control. Now, what does that mean? Basically, it's a directive about the interplay between management and shareholders / investors. And the first who has written about this market for corporate control is a lawyer, Henry Manny, in 1965. And his finding was basically the following. Shareholders are typically in companies which are in very dispersed ownership without any real power. One thought. That was the finding much earlier by Burley Means already in 1932. And that was referred to as the Burley Means Company or Corporation. Now, many found out or described that actually that is not always true. There can be a kind of interplay between management and shareholders which re-empowers shareholders. This is possible by the following way. You have one management in one company, the so-called target company, and the shareholders of that company. And then you have another company with a management who thinks that they could do the job of that target company much better. And then what they do, they make a bid to the shareholders of the target company, so the management of the bidder company to the shareholders of the target company, that the shareholders of the target company sell their shares to the bidder company. In this way, the management of the bidder company becomes a competitor of the management of the target company, and they compete on the market for corporate control. The control being in that case the management service. There is, of course, this market for corporate control is very complex, and actually there is a competition as well on the level of shareholders. Basically, shareholders buying shares and thereby the position to appoint management, and they can compete for that as well until one becomes a majority shareholder or a somehow dominant shareholder having a block of shares. Now, it's interesting that somehow a lawyer invents probably what is the market not known before or not described before, which is the most relevant over the 20th century. There have been many markets, many market segments, but that one had not been discovered before, and it tells a little bit about somehow how I conceived the book. I conceive it as well somehow as an interplay between law and other disciplines, economic theory, for instance. Takeover theory is a lot influenced and discussed by economists as well, and if you take the two together, actually you know much more about the real life of companies, what one calls the corporate governance, the potential influence of different actors in companies. Of course, labor can be one as well, accountants can be one as well. For the takeover market, we basically have the interplay between one management and one set of shareholders. Now, this example tells you as well one of differences in approach between the US and the EU. We have basically in that directive two measures protecting the strength of shareholders. The one is that basically, the directive forbids management to take so-called defensive measures, the management of the target company. So to give all the power to the shareholders of the target company really to accept the bid. Otherwise, the management of the target company would have manifold possibilities somehow to obstruct such a bid. It's a very intricate regulation. Actually, there is a lot of only disclosure, some market mechanism inbuilt there, but basically there is more regulation on the European side than on the US side. That becomes even clearer when it comes to the so-called mandatory bid. The management of the bidding company has to make a mandatory bid to all shareholders of the target company. Why this? Basically, economists very much struggled about this, and it was very disputed. Many said, well, if the target company really has to buy all the shares, then it becomes more costly, and then such takeovers take place much less. The rationale of the European regulation, which again is stricter than the US regulation in the member states of the, or in the states of the, in the US states, basically Delaware, the rationale is if you force the target company, the bidding company really to make a bid to all shareholders, then the bidding company cannot profit from minority shareholders which have to stay in the target company, loot them, and basically pay the price of that takeover by looting the remaining minority shareholders in the target company. So it has a filtering effect, that mandatory bid. It tells you that economists quarrel. It tells you that there are diversities of regulation and of regulatory scope in Europe and in the US.